Bine v-am găsit, dragi telespectatori, la o ediție specială a emisiunii Calea Adevarul și Viața. În cadrul acestei ediții, după cum am obișnuit deja, prezentăm din când în când, periodic, ediții speciale înregistrate în Bruxelles sau în alte țări din vestul Europei, emisiuni realizate în parteneriat cu European Coalition for Israel. Sub genericul Raport European, cel puțin o dată pe lună, vă prezentăm în emisiunea Calea Adevarul și Viața acestei emisiuni. Sunt niște dialoguri care, vă spuneam, sub umbrela acestei organizații Europeană Coalition for Israel, aduc în atenția dumneavoastră, aduc în prim plan parlamentari, lideri europeni, persoane din zona publică implicate în decizii care se iau la nivel european. Desigur că perspectiva abordată și în aceste emisiuni, și în emisiunea pe care vă introduc astăzi, este cea creștină. European Coalition for Israel este o organizație europeană, din care fac parte, pe lângă nucleul de bază, numeroase organizații, persoane, lideri creștini din întreaga Europa. S-a deschis în ultima vreme către alte zone ale continentului și ale lumii. Este o organizație, credem noi, cu cel mai eficient lobby în lumea politică vis-a-vis de voia lui Dumnezeu pentru Israel. În această emisiune vrem să vă prezentăm o dezbatere sub acest generic Raport European, în care sunt prezenți 3 dintre lideri acestei lucrări. Moderator este Perin Dufois și unul din invitați este chiar președintele, fondator al acestei organizații, Thomas Sandell. Îl cunoaște și din alte emisiuni, este prieten al nostru și persoana cu totul specială, și Gregory Lafitte. El este reprezentantul European Coalition for Israel, ECI, cum mi se spune prescurtat, la Organizația Națiunilor Unite. Veți afla mai multe lucruri despre viziunea, preocupările acestei organizații, modul în care Dumnezeu operează prin ei. În timp ce îi urmăriți și ascultați, rugați-vă pentru ca, prin ceea ce fac ei, Dumnezeu să atingă chiar și inima parlamentarilor europeni și a liderilor politici de vârf ai României, ca să fie și ei expuși la cuvântul Evangheliei, să înțeleagă și ei perspectiva biblică asupra Israelului. După cum știți, multe decizii în Parlamentul European sau în organisme europene se iau în legătură cu Orientul Mijlociu, cu lumea musulmană. Rugați-vă ca cei care ne reprezintă pe noi în aceste forumuri, în aceste instituții, organisme la nivel european, să fie impregnați de voia lui Dumnezeu și să fie un instrument în mâna lui Dumnezeu pentru decizii corecte, pentru poziționări corecte vis-a-vis de Israel și vis-a-vis de hotărâri care au de-a face cu Orientul Mijlociu. Așadar, în această ediție a emisiunii Raport European, o dezbatere, o prezentare de principii, direcții, obiective ale organizației European Coalition for Israel, Coaliția Europeană pentru Israel, având ca moderator, vă spuneam, pe Perin Dufois, cu invitați Thomas Sandell și Gregory Lafitte, toți 3 membri din nucleul fondator al acestei organizații. Dumnezeu să vă binecuvânteze.
At the beginning of the year 2000 in Europe, there were some signs of rising anti-Semitism. Because of that, the European Commission organized a large conference in Brussels. One of the main speakers was the Nobel Prize, Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel was asked to speak about the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe many years after the end of Second World War. In his address, Elie Wiesel had a very strong statement, and he said, as he was looking at the rise of anti-Semitism, where are the voices? Not the Jewish voices, they were there, but where are the others? This statement, where are the others, really impacted a man. This man is Thomas Sandell, and he questioned himself deeply. Where are the other voices, the non-Jewish voices, who could stand and speak against anti-Semitism and support the Jewish people in Europe? Out of that question was birthed a vision and a project and an organization, European Coalition for Israel. European Coalition for Israel, it's the gathering of organization people who are not Jews and who want to stand on behalf of the Jewish people in Europe and for Israel. Today we're going to talk about what happened. That happened 12 years ago now. What happened since? How European Coalition developed? What are the challenges? And for that, we have Thomas Sandell, the founding director, the man who got the vision, who received in his heart the desire to do something and be the voice, the other voice for the Jewish people in Europe. So thank you for being with us, Thomas.
Thank you.
And there's no better than to start with you telling us what happened on that day when you heard this comment of Elie Wiesel, who said, "Where are the others?" What happened in your heart and how it bring about European Coalition for Israel?
Well, thank you, Perrine, for coming back to that very special moment for me, and I think for many of us. When we realized in 2003, 2004 that there was a voice lacking at the political institutions in Europe, I would say a relevant voice that would speak up for the Jewish people who again were being faced with anti-Semitism in Europe. My background then being in journalism, and I sometimes jokingly said that was also the background of Theodor Herzl, being a journalist at the time of the Dreyfus trial, and realizing again that there was a voice missing at that time in the public debate standing up for the Jewish people. No other comparison to Theodor Herzl from my side, other than to say that as a journalist often you have a broad perspective on developments in society, and I think I was one of many that discovered that something was going very much in a dangerous direction in Europe, and this time we needed to do something. And when I say we, I mean not those who are affected by anti-Semitism, the Jewish community, but those who are watching it. And I'm speaking here especially from a Christian perspective, and I believe we as Christians in Europe, we have a special responsibility to stand up for the Jewish people. But also to do it in a relevant way. And we always said that the situation before 2003 was not that Christians would not have an understanding about the special role of the Jewish people or Israel, but the fact that we did not do very much at that point. And I think this is what we've seen over the last 12, 13 years, is that there is a voice which is being recognized. Sometimes you may say it's still a weak voice, so be it, but there's definitely a voice being heard in Brussels at the European Union level, and increasingly also at the United Nations. So it's been a wonderful journey.
Long journey now, it's about 13, 12 years.
Yes.
ECI, European Coalition for Israel, exists officially, is based in Brussels. Its headquarters is in Brussels and operates from Brussels, like the center of a lot of European institutions. Gregory Lafitte is the United Nations Director, so the beyond Europe, I would say. Sure. You've been partnering with this initiative with Thomas Sandell for several years, and even more involved since a few years around the United Nations affairs, mainly New York and beyond. How would you, with your point of view, describe the specificity of ECI, knowing that there are other organizations that exist? What is for you unique about ECI work and identity?
Well, thank you, Perrine. I think I could describe it in a bit in a trivial way, is that there are many organizations in Europe and even at the United Nations in New York or in Geneva, but the specificity of ECI, I would say, is that it's first of all a non-Jewish organization, so it's defending the Jewish people, trying to combat, trying to go against anti-Semitism in Europe, but from a non-Jewish perspective. So it's like what you mentioned at the beginning that Elie Wiesel was saying, where are the others? We're trying to be the others, and so that's the first specificity, is that we're non-Jewish, mostly Christians, sorry, and the second specificity is that we're non-Americans, because most of the time when you have organizations defending Israel or defending the Jewish people, it's mostly American organizations, so it's a European organization, and it's non-Israeli. So we're in contact, of course, with the Israeli government, but it doesn't come from an Israeli point of view. So it's mostly from a European point of view. And as Europeans, I think we have a responsibility, knowing what happened and seeing what is happening today. With the knowledge of what happened, we have to do something. We cannot just stand idle like that and just be observers of what is going on in Europe in particular. But also at the global level, as Europeans, again, we need to raise our voices and to warn people of what is going on, of this sudden rise of anti-Semitism that is coming back, and no one was really expecting it anymore. I mean, we thought everyone is saying never again, but we still see some horrific things happen in Europe. So I think we have a voice, being Europeans, coming from a non-Jewish, non-Israeli background. We have a responsibility to raise a voice.
Well, thank you. I think both of you have, first question, underlined something that is essential, that is European Coalition for Israel, as its name says, it's European. Mm-hmm. And Europe has a voice today, mm-hmm. and need to have a greater voice. Mm-hmm. And that's something, before we go into the realization of this organization, I'd like to go a little bit deeper into this uniqueness of mm-hmm. relationship between Israel, the Jewish people, mm-hmm. and Europe. Mm-hmm. Common, as you said, common past, common populations that came from a lot of the people who immigrated, beginning coming from Europe to Israel, beginning of the creation of the states, common values. Those are challenged today, isn't it? So, Thomas, what is ECI doing to nurture this relationship, to increase or to refresh, I don't know what to say, this relationship between Israel as a nation and Europe?
Obviously, the relationship between Europe and Israel, as you say, go very deep. We come from the same tree. Without this tree, there would be no Europe. We wouldn't even have an understanding of what Europe is, what distinguishes Europe from the rest of the world, if it wasn't for the Jewish people, what came out of Jerusalem, which is common to our faith. And so we often emphasize the fact that we want to stress Judeo-Christian values. And with Judeo-Christian values today, we're not only looking at Christian values in a very limited way, but everything we take for granted in secular European societies, be in France or Finland, freedom of expression, rule of law, parliamentary democracy, equality between men and women, religious freedom, everything comes back to this very specific root, this very specific tree, which came from Jerusalem. So, and when we look at the Middle East today, and we see the Middle East is in complete chaos, we see some of the most brutal expressions of violence that we've seen in mankind. And but we see a light in this very dark region, which is Israel. And we see one partner for Europe which have or subscribe to the same values like we do, and that is Israel. So I believe that being a supporter of Israel today is really a matter of the survival of our way of life, or our civilization. And if we lose this battle in the Middle East, we will also eventually lose it here in Europe. So you may even turn it around and say that being a friend of Israel today is also defending our own way of life. And I think everyone should realize this when they watch the news from this region, to say, well, what is the choice which we have, between barbaric terrorists that behead people who don't think the way they do, or a vibrant democracy. Of course, a vibrant democracy with flaws, with politicians which are not perfect, but nevertheless a vibrant parliamentary democracy. So the choice is very simple, and this is what we're trying to explain on and on again. We should support and strengthen perhaps our only friend in this region, and not try to only criticize and be negative and demonize Israel.
If I understand you correctly, does that mean that there is no question about Israel, or do you embrace everything about Israel?
Well, my relation with Israel is pretty much like my relation to my own government in Finland or the European Union. There are many things that I'm critical about here in Finland when it comes to European society, and it also applies to Israel. Of course, you know, Israelis are no better than other nationalities. So yes, I think we can be critical. We can be open with our criticism, but nevertheless, I think it's still a matter of two very different kind of societies, and in this respect, I do value an open democratic society.
So what your ECI is inviting us to do is to really go deeper where our foundations are.
Yes.
And from there,
Yep.
to look at what's going on today.
Correct.
Well, thank you. Well, I think we understood pretty much the global vision of ECI, but now we want to know the concrete, what's happening concretely, what is on a daily base, on a yearly base, how is this organization functioning, how do you involve your time, where do you work, with who do you meet, what are the action you are taking, step you are taking. So Gregory, can you tell us a little bit about, I'm sure there are many things that could be said, but just to help us to understand concretely, can you illustrate for us one, two, or some actions that you think are very relevant to illustrate the things that ECI has been involved in over the last 12 years, or the things that you will be kind of fulfilling for you, pride for, if in a good way, if I may say, of realization?
Yes. Well, I think to come back to just what Thomas just said, trying to explain what is the difference between two different kinds of societies, and which one are we going to try to go for and try to encourage. That is I think really what was the debate a few years ago, when there was the question of having a Palestinian state unilaterally without going through negotiations, and this is something where we've been a lot involved at the United Nations to try to explain that everything of the conflict should be solved through negotiations only. And so this is something that we've put a lot of energy in, trying to meet with a number of nations. We've met with something like 60 plus nations at the United Nations to try to explain this. And so I would say, even if it was a bit, I think, a sad moment for the international community, but on November 29, 2012, we were in the United Nations, in the General Assembly Hall, standing with Israel, to not to go against the idea of a Palestinian state, but to say that it was premature to try to obtain this status, this observer non-member state status. So this was a highlight, even if it was a bit of a sad highlight. If I would give a second highlight, I would say that it's what we've been currently involved in at the United Nations is trying to make the UN a better place. It's a big,
I'm sure they like it when you tell them that.
Yes, it's a big project, but a first step in that project is when we realize that even on an important holiday like Yom Kippur for the Jewish people, where it's impossible for them to work. I mean, if there's one day in the year where it's very special, it's Yom Kippur, and UN didn't recognize it in any way, and there was even some Security Council debates on that day on the Middle East in the past, and we found this to be really unacceptable, and to try to find a solution to change this. So we've been working quite a lot of trying to make Yom Kippur a UN official holiday, and we went, I think, through the first step in that process, and it's now being recognized as a special holiday in New York, and they're going to try to make sure that no important meeting is held on that day. And if I may add a third, for me, highlight, it's I would say it was this year. This year in January, we had a special concert of commemoration in the synagogue of Krakow with the Jewish community to commemorate the Holocaust. And for me, it was something very, very special to be able to do this for the 70th anniversary in this with the Jewish community in this synagogue in Krakow. So that was some of the highlights.
Yeah, thank you. Different
Different
approach, political approach, more cultural,
yes,
relational approach,
Yeah.
but both are important.
Yes.
Isn't it? For you, Thomas, what would be 12 and even more years of putting and giving yourself to this project? What would you remind? What would be the main things that you will remind yourself? Will be
Obviously, there are a number of important events. I think the first that comes to mind, also chronologically, because it was our first achievement, was that we managed to be the first organization to organize a Holocaust Remembrance Day event in the European Parliament. Already in 2005, when this day was not still a UN commemoration day. And I think it also shows how we can, as a relatively small organization, have an impact in a large institution as the European Union, because today, 10 years later, it's an official EU commemoration event, which we were organizing on our own for a number of years, and then did it together with Jewish organizations. So this really, for me, is an illustration that we can shape policy in large organization by acting, with timely initiatives. I think there are two others, if I may. Of course, since 2010, a lot of our work has been relating to what happened in San Remo in 1920, something that was mostly forgotten in the international debate, until we went back to San Remo, to the original place where this San Remo resolution was signed in April 1920. And had a 90th anniversary, and finally then step by step started to build on this San Remo resolution by producing up a video, Give Peace a Chance, by going to parliaments around the world, from London to Tokyo to Rome to the United Nations. And that would be my third highlight, if I may, to say that we were then able to convey this same message for ambassadors of the UN Security Council in a private luncheon hosted by one of the most prominent UN ambassadors in New York. And for me, that was, I could even say that even if all the 12 years of work would have been only for that moment, I think it would have been worth every single day. So we could go on, and I think when we look back, there are so many events where ECI have been able to make a difference. Maybe I just mention shortly a fourth, because it's something which is on the agenda so much, and that is the misuse of European funding to the Palestinian authorities. And already in 2005, very early on in our work, we were able to submit position paper to the European Commission, which resulted in the freezing of funding to the Palestinian authorities at that time, quoting many of the arguments that we presented in our paper. So I think these small examples give a little bit of an idea of how we can be effective by using our resources in an intelligent way.
Indeed, and also in both of you, what we can hear is the importance of being at the right time, at the right place. And if I understood and if I hear you correctly, you may not be hundreds, but you are the right people at the right place at the right time with a significant message. And it seems that that opened doors and that changed some realities. And that's good to remember. We often think we need to be hundreds to change things, and sometimes significant professional, significant initiative can make a difference.
Yeah.
Thank you. It really helped us to understand what has been achieved over the last years. How do you look now for the future? I mean, we know the future in regards to the world and Israel can change quickly.
Yeah.
So we know things can change quickly. But what would be, you think, the main challenge, the main priority for each one of you, if you can give me one, for the next 5 years? Gregory?
Well, considering the United Nations, I must say I'm a big fan of the United Nations. I think it's a wonderful organization. When you look at the basis, at the core of the United Nations, it's the UN Charter. It's actually the 70th anniversary this year of the UN, the signing of the UN Charter, and it's really the basis of the UN. And I think if we would come back even to the principles, to the goals of that charter, then the UN would really be a better place. And so I think it's really a perspective for me to try to work with the UN member states to make the UN a better place, and in particular concerning the Jewish people. When we see this rise of anti-Semitism, we need to do something, I think, about this.
Thank you. For you, Thomas?
Yes, I think there's a word conventionally when we look at Israel and the threats that Israel is facing as a nation, we often think about the military threat. And obviously this is something that we have to keep in mind, but we are not a military organization, we are not a military intelligence organization, but I think that the greatest threat that Israel will be facing and is facing today is a very different type of warfare. And it's called international lawfare. And it's a twisting of laws, a twisting of words, where white becomes black and black becomes white, where Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East is suddenly the biggest violators of human rights in the Middle East. So everything is very bizarre. I recall having sat with our chairman Harald Eckert at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva a number of years ago, and he said, now I understand for the first time how things could happen in Germany the way they did, because the situation was so bizarre. But after, it's almost like brainwashing. After you hear these lies repeatedly said in a very distinguished audiences, you start to believe them. So I think that our goal will really be to engage in this international lawfare, to take on the BDS, the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement, where you sadly have many churches and Christian organizations at the forefront. And I think for us as Christians, we really have a responsibility here to even stand up among our own people and said, let us not do the same mistakes as we did once in the 1930s, where we also know that Christians were those who were igniting anti-Semitism. So there are challenges, but they may look a little bit different than what they did in the past, but I think here we really have a role to play.
Indeed you have. And it seems that what is in front of you is even greater than what has been behind. Yeah. But probably on what the experience and also the trust that you've built in different circles you're evolving, the political circles and the leadership circles, would help you to challenge whether the UN Charter, whether the international lawfare in regards to Israel and the Jewish people. There is a long road to go. Seems to have a lot of energy for that. And there was, we can say much, but I'd like to conclude because at the end of our time together, if I understand well what has been the heart of European Coalition for Israel since the beginning, and also what is the long, eternal, I may say, vision for this coalition and what this coalition wants to participate and be part of and be one participants of a global vision. I think we should read, to conclude, this quote of the prophet Isaiah. Nobody better than him said it. And I will read to you this quote of out of Isaiah chapter 2 of verse 4, part of it, that says, They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up swords against nations, neither shall they learn war anymore. I think this remains the hope for all of us. It's definitely on the agenda of European Coalition for Israel. It has been and it will be, to contribute to a better world.